I wouldn't describe it as a coming of age, but it was really accepting responsibility for that name and everything that had happened to me since then. For many years, the narrative of Julian Lennon was repeated in bits and pieces with hints of grief, rage, and tenderness, but never in its whole. He chose to shatter the taboo of silence at the age of 62, eliminating any possibility of skepticism or denial. He made a serious, startling, and unavoidable confession. It was spoken honestly, unvarnished, and without rage. Julian opened up for the first time about how deeply he felt for a woman who had permanently altered his life. The world was astonished by what he said. I detested her to my core. Julian Lennon's silent wounds. John Lennon abandoned Julian Lennon and his mother Cynthia when he was quite young in order to be with Yoko Ono. Julian was profoundly impacted by this revelation, which stunned Beatles fans. The headlines and the band didn't matter to him. His father's desertion wounded him. At a time when Julian most needed parental love, support, and guidance, he was left without it. The writer's childhood was characterized by a sense of emptiness, perplexity, and unresolved questions because his parents split when he was still a child. Julian had a different viewpoint, despite the fact that many people admired John Lennon for his heartfelt songs and serene demeanor. He viewed Lennon as a man who had deserted his family, a father who had failed to raise him, mentor him, or console him in difficult times. Julian didn't care about the Beatles' breakup or the public's fixation on celebrity rumors. Rather, his father's choice to abandon him wounded him. An emotional scar that never completely healed was left behind by this suffering. When Julian thought back on his history, he found it hard to understand how a parent could desert their child. His identity was defined by this persistent inquiry, which also shaped the person he became. His mother, Cynthia, struggled to cope with the fallout. She protected her son from the hurt of abandonment by acting as both a mother and a guardian. Their lives were difficult since they lacked wealth and did not lead the opulent lifestyle that one might anticipate from the family of a well-known singer. Cynthia took every precaution to ensure her son's safety and security. In order for Julian to have access to food, clothing, and an education, she even gave up sentimental items that had been passed down through her family. Her sacrifices prepared the way for his destiny, and her love gave him strength. Julian had to deal with an unfriendly and challenging world. He had considerably more difficulties at school. Because they believed he led an affluent and opulent life, some of his classmates were jealous of him. He is the son of John Lennon. But this was untrue, and their presumptions caused Julian to be treated cruelly. People who believed he had more than they did began to abuse him, taunt him, make fun of him, and even physically assault him. In actuality, all he had was a well-known name that did not provide him with the solace they had hoped for. Throughout these years, Julian strengthened his inner fortitude. He realized at an early age that although something may appear one way, it may actually be different. Many people aspire to fame and fortune, yet these things don't always translate into contentment or safety. Julian identified the underlying emotions of loneliness and sadness beneath the glitzy exterior of famous life. Julian maintained an alternative view of John Lennon, whereas the general public viewed him as a symbol of love and peace. The calm emptiness he felt at home contrasted with the idealized portrayal of his father. His early sense of unfairness began to affect his thoughts and feelings regarding his father as he grew older. He saw more than just legends, well-known musicians, and campaigners. Instead, he witnessed a dad who showed his son a new side and left behind his original family. This was a constant source of struggle for Julian, and it played a big role in his life narrative. Julian's relationship with John remained strained throughout his adolescence. They rarely interacted after the divorce, and when they did, it was awkward. They would occasionally meet in person or speak on the phone, but it never felt real. Julian felt even more abandoned as John concentrated on his new life with Yoko Ono and their son, Sean. From a distance, he watched his father transform into a loving parent to Sean. Numerous people found it endearing that John had given up his job to raise his younger son. That was painful for Julian, though. It was unlike any devotion he had ever felt from his father. Sean and Julian's tense relationship was significantly damaged by their obvious unequal treatment of one another. Julian was always candid about the distinction. He later brought attention to what he perceived to be his father's hypocritical public persona. According to him, John Lennon left his first child and wife to fend for themselves while preaching to the world about love, peace, and unity. The disparity between John's actions and his words was too significant to ignore. A harsh remark that Julian's father allegedly made is one unpleasant memory that has stayed with him. According to rumors, his father claimed that Julian was conceived by accident while intoxicated. On the other hand, love gave birth to his brother Sean. Julian was profoundly impacted by the statement, regardless of its accuracy. Julian was reminded of how unloved he frequently felt by the words, which represented a split between them. There were some joyful moments even amid the sorrow. When John was taking a vacation from Yoko in the 1970s, a woman named May Pang encouraged him to see Julian. It was during this time that they were able to bond. Although John gave Julian a drum machine and a guitar as gifts, the most valuable thing was the time they spent together. They listened to music together, enjoyed each other's company, and Julian finally experienced fatherhood. For him, the recollections held great significance. They were short, but important. Despite the distance, they demonstrated John's concern. But communication stopped when John returned to Yoko. There was stillness between them once more. There were hints of hope by the time Julian was about 15. John would occasionally call from New York. He once played a brand new song for Julian on the phone called Just Like Starting Over. Both the song's optimism and his father's joy were audible to Julian. For an instant, it appeared as though there could be a chance to make their relationship better. But that hope was fragile, and it was taken from Julian too soon. John Lennon was tragically killed in a senseless act of murder in December 1980. The demise of the legendary musician and activist was lamented by the world community. The night Julian's father passed away forever, the world was irrevocably altered on the cold night of December 8, 1980. John Lennon passed away tragically in Manhattan, outside a quiet building in New York City. He had met a young man outside his house that day and signed an album for him. The fact that Mark David Chapman would subsequently murder him brutally was unknown to everyone. After recording some songs, John arrived home late. Chapman, who had been waiting, shot him 4 times in the back of the car as soon as he got out. One of the most gifted artists was silenced by this horrible deed. At Roosevelt Hospital, John Lennon was declared dead 10 minutes later. People all throughout the world were shocked by the news, which traveled swiftly. The following day, fans awoke in shock, trying to comprehend how a well-known and adored musician could be put to death so close to his house. Outside, a group of individuals gathered and began to cry in silence. Jay's widow, Yoko Ono, declared that there would be no funeral. Rather, she asked the public to commemorate Jay's memory by continuing to support his lifetime pursuit of peace. In North Wales, a small kid named Julian Lennon was grieved by the loss of a famous figure, while people throughout the world were depressed. John Lennon's eldest son is named Julian. Though not as evident as the millions of followers in grief, his pain was nonetheless extremely real. After returning from boarding school, Julian was residing with his mother, Cynthia, in the tiny hamlet of Ruthin. He was thrilled to see his father again and was glad to be home. A few days prior, John had called him from New York, and his voice sounded friendly and animated. During the call, John played a brand new song from his double fantasy album called Just Like Starting Over. Julian grinned and expressed his admiration for the music to his father. As Julian sensed his father's joy and vitality, it was a unique moment of bonding. They felt hopeful for the first time in years. They thought that the boundaries that had been established by years of silence and separation could be broken down. They had hope that they would be able to be father and son again. One night, as Julian was resting in the attic room of their Castle Street home, he was startled out of his slumber, not by the ringing of the telephone, but rather by the collapse of his room's chimney, which sent bricks tumbling into the quiet darkness. It felt as though everything he knew was collapsing, and this sudden incident represented a significant change in his life. He soon learned about his father's disappearance. When Julian last heard John's voice, it was animated as he discussed life, music, and fresh starts. However, that voice is now permanently lost. Julian has a clear memory of their chats. They were the last ones, but they also represented a future that never materialized. His thoughts of a different version of their connection will never go away. One where they patched up old wounds, laughed, and made up. Regretfully, such reality will never materialize. John's music, his legacy, and the unresolved love between a father and his son are all that remain. Yoko and Sean, his younger son who had lived with his father in his final years, became the center of attention as people grieved John's passing. Sean had the honor of witnessing his father's love and happiness every day when he woke up. Julian, on the other hand, was left with recollections of distance, fleeting phone conversations, and now the brutal truth of his father's death. Julian felt a distinct type of melancholy following the catastrophe. The reading of John's will revealed a terrible reality. Everything was turned up to Yoko, including an estate valued at more than $200 million. Julian received a £100,000 trust fund instead of a straight inheritance. The enormous fortune from John's solo work, the Beatles' hits, and continuing royalties made this seem inconsequential. The money wasn't the only thing that upset Julian. Not being recognized by his father in his will was the most painful thing. The suffering of his early years was exacerbated by witnessing everything being given away to others while he had virtually little left. It had nothing to do with money. It was about being accepted as his father's child and feeling like he belonged. The gap between his life and Sean's was widening. As time passed, Julian hoped for the same, and Sean received a lot of love from John in his final years. As the estate's CEO, Yoko made sure that Julian couldn't access any of John's belongings. Julian began to feel increasingly excluded over time. In the end, he made a decision that would significantly affect his adult life. Julian made the decision to defend what he felt was rightly his and fight back. He filed a lawsuit against the estate, which grew into a battle that lasted over 2 decades. The trip was difficult and draining. People frequently failed to comprehend his motivations. It appeared to others that he was merely pursuing his father's fortune. In actuality, though, he was driven by more than just money. Julian was attempting to take back some of his history. He wanted the personal items, instruments, and letters that brought back memories of his father. No matter how tense their relationship had been, these were symbols of it. The lengthy and tense negotiations took a long time. Despite the emotional toll the fight took on him, he persisted because he wanted to leave his mark on his father's legacy. A deal was eventually reached in the middle of the 1990s. A reported $20 million was given to Julian. The sorrow of having to struggle for what he believed should have been his from the start was not lessened, even if it gave him security and stability. Although the legal arrangement gave him autonomy, it did not provide him with inner peace. The years spent apart, the memories lost, and the things unsaid could not be replaced by money. Brothers in Lennon's shadow. Julian and Sean Lennon have developed a close and sincere relationship despite having distinct upbringings and memories of John Lennon. In their early years, their connection was impacted by shared understanding, sorrow, and distance rather than being intimate all the time. This bond was not born, rather, it evolved as they dealt with life as the sons of a well-known person. Due to his father's early abandonment, Julian had a difficult upbringing. His sole exposure to John Lennon as a child was through TV, newspapers, and other people's stories. Though it seemed like a myth, he yearned for his father's presence. On the other hand, Julian felt empty because Yoko Ono and Shaw were constantly around John. Julian may have become resentful as a result of this disparity, which left him with a permanent wound. Sean grew up in a different environment. His early years were characterized by the presence of his father, an abundance of affection, and the reassuring reminder that John Lennon was alive. Sean felt close to his family and cherished, unlike Julian. But when his father unexpectedly died in December 1980, everything was different. Sean felt that he would never be able to fill the gap this loss had created in his life. Sean and Julian were very different from one another. While one was used to being close, the other was used to being far away. While one experienced the shock of sudden loss, the other felt the anguish of longing. Instead of being permanently separated by these differences, they came to understand each other in a special way. In their own way, they all understand what it was like to live under the oppressive weight of the Lennon name. Both of them had to deal with the pressure of the public's infatuation with their family, the incessant comparisons, and the difficulty of paving their own paths while leaving a legacy they never chose. They grew closer over time as a result of their shared struggles. Since they didn't have many childhood memories in common, their friendship wasn't created by those experiences. Rather, it evolved from a tacit recognition that they both had hardships that were beyond the comprehension of the majority. There was a momentous occasion in 2006. Julian traveled to Paris to attend one of Sean's performances. Something changed in him when he saw his younger brother perform for the first time. Julian saw beyond their father's influence when he saw Sean perform. Sean's talent was clearly evident to him. They became closer as a result of this encounter. While Sean was on tour the following year, in 2007, Julian spent more time with him. Their time together was straightforward yet important. Years of separation generated a disconnect that was partially repaired by it. Moments of happiness, affection, and togetherness gradually took the place of the previous separation. Julian began to feel protective and proud of his brother. His love for his younger sibling was a major factor in his decision to keep a positive relationship with Yoko Ono, and he often spoke fondly about Sean. It would be impossible for Julian to harm Sean. Julian and Sean watched rare footage of their father, John Lennon, in the studio together in 2021 while watching the Beatles' Get Back documentary in London. They witnessed a youthful, jovial, and extraordinarily imaginative John Lennon. For Julian, seeing his father in this light was a life-changing experience because it restored a vision of him that he had gradually lost. During those hours, his resentment of his father subsided and was replaced by a softer kind of affection. Julian found this trip much more memorable because he shared it with Sean. Both brothers honor their father in different ways today. Julian continues his father's artistic legacy by expressing himself via storytelling, photography, and music. In order to guarantee that his father's legacy is heard by people throughout the world, Sean works behind the scenes by overseeing portions of John Lennon's music library and creative endeavors. They have managed to carry the Lennon name with dignity despite the constant difficulty of doing so. It has evolved into a common tie that binds people together rather than separating them. Throughout his life, Julian has encountered many challenges, however, he has consistently demonstrated resilience. Since he was young, he has had to deal with challenging situations, which have left him emotionally scarred for life. He has experienced times of peace and contentment in spite of these difficulties, particularly in his close bond with his brother Shaw, which has given him a great deal of enjoyment. Sean has gone through his own journey of grief and fortitude. Despite coming from a different background as Julian, he can relate to the constant comparisons. Because of their common circumstances, the brothers have bonded. Although they are powerless to alter the past, they have created a loving and respectful present in place of resentment and estrangement. A silent excursion outside of the Beatles. Many people believe that the Beatles' kids would be well versed on the band's history. The Beatles were a revolutionary band that altered the music landscape, and their tale continues to captivate audiences worldwide. John Lennon's first son, Julian Lennon, has shown that this isn't always the case. Actually, when he hears about the band, he frequently feels excluded. Julian recently discussed his life and career with a British newspaper. Despite being recognized as the son of John Lennon, Julian has forged a career outside from his father's well-known band. Julian's recent endeavors and his thoughts on being linked to a name that will live on in history were also discussed in the conversation. Julian spoke passionately during the conversation about his passion for photography, which has grown to be a significant interest of his. A book titled Life's Fragile Moments is his most recent project. intended to convey his distinct viewpoint on the world by catching fleeting moments that others would overlook. For Julian, photography is a means of achieving inner calm, creating something lasting, and claiming his uniqueness independent of his father's reputation. Julian has stated that he is not concentrating on making new songs at the moment. Not too long ago, he made an effort to go back into the music business, even preparing to appear on television. He was quite upset and nearly heartbroken, nevertheless, when his intentions did not turn out as planned. He took a break as a result of this encounter. He chose to focus his energies on the art that gives him a sense of independence rather than pursue music in a world where he is frequently compared to his father, John Lennon. Julian claimed that being recognized as John Lennon's son had shaped his entire existence. People always bring up his well-known father wherever he goes. It has been difficult at times, sometimes feeling like an unavoidable burden. On the other hand, he realized that he wanted to define himself. Regardless of his ancestry, he aimed to produce a collection of work that would stand on its own. He continues to work hard and methodically to increase his accomplishments because he wants to prove to himself that he can succeed on his own, not to get approval from others. He made it clear that his actions had nothing to do with boasting or seeking attention. It was more about his self-belief in creating art, such as music in the past and photography in the present. Julian gives himself proof that he is capable. He doesn't care to argue with others about their opinions of him. His confidence in the importance of his work is what matters to him. The Beatles became the topic of discussion. The group has seen a resurgence in popularity in recent years, almost as a sentimental comeback to remind everyone of their brilliance. A new, younger audience that missed the original impact has been exposed to their music through documentaries and updated movies. Fans were given a behind-the-scenes look at the band's creative process in Peter Jackson's 2021 documentary Get Back, which presented them in a novel manner. In 2024, David Tedeschi and Martin Scorsese's film Beatles 64 paid tribute to the band at the height of their fame. A long-standing historical event has gained new attention thanks to the restoration of Michael Lindsay Hogg's 1970 film Let It Be. According to Julian, these endeavors demonstrate the Beatles' continued popularity. Their tale endures in both literature and the hearts of future generations. Even so, he occasionally feels left out and marginalized in the band's continuing history. He does not, however, seem to harbor any bitterness toward his situation. The tacit agreement between Julian Lennon and Yoko Ono. Julian, John Lennon's son, carried a great weight that never went away for a long time after his tragic death. His feelings for Yoko Ono, the lady who entered his father's life and fundamentally changed the trajectory of his family, were the source of this burden. She was more than just his father's second wife to Julian. She represented a turning point, the challenging time when his father chose to choose a different route and abandon his mother, Cynthia. Julian viewed her as a continual reminder of his heartbreak rather than as a stepmother. She represented all the things that had disturbed his early years. The sense of bitterness persisted for a while. Rather, it grew stronger with time. The resentment was not only sentimental, it was also pragmatic. After his father passed away, John's possessions were the subject of years of court disputes. Julian was reminded that Yoko was in charge of his father's legacy with each legal letter, discussion, and decision. For almost 20 years he had little power as the son, but those continual reminders made him more suspicious. Julian, who never held back when discussing his views, acknowledged that he had a hard time seeing Yoko as anything other than an enemy. He found it difficult to trust her since he felt she controlled his emotional attachment to his father and his belongings. You could sense the strain in the air whenever the family was spotted in public. Lennon-related events frequently appeared to be practiced. Despite their courteous greets, grins, and nods, they didn't seem to really connect. Yoko and Julian remained apart, their relationship silent and icy. Observers could see that they were a considerable distance apart. Their mutual silence revealed a great deal about their past, but life tends to soften even the most difficult circumstances with time. Even though it was bitter, there were times when unforeseen events caused the rage to lessen a little. One such occasion was the launch of Julian's photographic exhibit, Timeless, in September 2010. Julian valued the occasion since it allowed the world to see his work. The broad collection of people it brought together was what really made it unique. For the first time, people from all eras of John Lennon's life gathered in the same space. Cynthia, Julian's mother, who was once in love with John, was there. There was also Sean, his younger half-brother, whom he loved very much. Attending as well was May Pang, who was close to John. There was also Yoko, of whom Julian had been suspicious. It was unclear how the evening would turn out. It's possible that some people expected disputes, arguments, or old grievances to resurface. But none of those bad things happened, which was unexpected. Rather, the evening passed amicably with hugs and cordial conversations. There was a feeling of peace, even though there was neither a dramatic nor an emotional reunion. The fact that everyone could be together without any disputes gave Julian solace because it demonstrated that even a delicate peace could be achieved. Julian's perspective began to change over time, not because he was forgiving, but rather because of his intense affection for Sean, his half-brother. They have always had a genuine and loving friendship. Julian wished to keep their relationship intact. Over time, he realized that continuing to harbor animosity toward Yoko would also be detrimental to Sean. His brother would also be harmed by any unfavorable deeds or remarks directed against Shah's mother. Julian made the decision that his affection for Sean would not be impacted by his prior frustrations. He decided to stop fighting as a result. He made the decision to put aside unwinnable old arguments and not allow rage to sour their relationship. This decision established a truce and an understanding that peace was more important than perpetual conflict. But it did not make the past vanish or cause wounds to magically heal. Since he realized that harming Sean's mother would also harm Sean, something he did not want to do. Julian admitted that he had altered his mindset. This insight affected his subsequent interactions with Yoko. In terms of settling disputes, he did not view her as a friend or an equal. Rather, he saw her as someone he could live with and endure because he loved his brother. Yoko and Julian continued to share a deep and complicated connection. Their past, including court cases, traumatic experiences, and the effects of their broken family, has an effect on it. Nevertheless, they both understand that total forgiveness isn't always necessary for true harmony. Sometimes choosing to hold back and avoid discussing previous hurts leads to peace. Julian was powerless to alter the past. He endured years of emotional detachment, protracted legal battles, and a great deal of suffering when his parents divorced. His life tale would never be complete without such memories. Julian, however, discovered how to cope with it without allowing it to dictate his every action. He took the straightforward but significant choice to set aside his previous intense anger in order to preserve his friendship with Sean. This peace is cautious, soft, and delicate, yet it is neither brave nor triumphant. But it does exist. It is made possible by recognizing that loving one person can lessen feelings of rage toward another, as well as by doing little acts of acceptance in settings where smiles can occur. How do you feel about the story of Julian Lennon? Leave a comment below with your opinions. Remember to hit the notification bell, like, and subscribe for more interesting content.